Hi everyone, here is a recording of the second lecture for COU103A, and this is about the historical and theoretical background of our understandings of human development across the lifespan. It's always really interesting to start with where theories have come from, because it gives you some kind of context about how they've developed, and later on when you come to kind of take them and have your own understandings of them, it gives you a background to kind of come up with your own understandings and your own critique from. So first of all, what is childhood? So this isn't something that has always been taken for granted. And for most of history, it wasn't seen as a separate or different period of life. It's just people just matured when they matured. And they had different ways of acting at different times, but to have a distinct kind of time frame where someone was considered to be adult and no longer a child was not universal. So schools were critical in the invention of child development. You went to school when you had the capacity to learn, and you left when you were an adult. Theoretically, of course, there's all different social and cultural events that come into play there. And there are still arguments about the age of criminal responsibility. So when are you adult enough to take full responsibility for your actions, and in Australia into the penal system as opposed to the juvenile penal system. So let's look at philosophers' views, and these ideas come from the Age of Reason, also known as the Age of Enlightenment. And for those of you who are not sort of so aware of why the Age of Enlightenment or the Age of Reason was important, it was a period of like real, what would I say, intellectual, cultural, and even kind of and social understanding. So things really progressed during this time. There were a lot of new inventions. The invention of the eyeglass, for example, although that's quite a simple invention. What happened as a result of that was that people who would have in the past not been able to still contribute to society and still continue to to learn and to share their knowledge with others in society were enabled to do so, because they then had glasses. They could keep on reading, they could keep on writing, they could keep on being part of society. So in terms of our understanding of child development, we've got John Locke, who said that children were a tabula rasa, and this basically just means a slate. So he said that children were just born as a blank slate, and that there was this continuous development. That's John Locke in the top there. There was this continuous development as people matured and changed over time. So for him, it was all about the power of nurture. And then we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And he had the idea of children as noble savages, and the idea also that development happens in stages. There are also two other German philosophers, which you can look up for yourself, Tettens and Carus, who suggested that development didn't stop at adolescence but continued through adulthood. So you can see that these ideas kind of develop from one another in certain periods of time. So these are the early understandings of childhood and what it meant to be a child and how we might develop as human beings. We also have evolutionary theories of development based on Darwin's theory of evolution. So I've put a nice little cartoon in there for you so that you can see that we kind of the way that we develop it physically, or a kind of joke about how we have developed physically anyway. So Darwin's theories, which I'm sure you're aware of, relate to natural selection and the survival of the fittest. So developmental theories also began to draw on Darwin's idea about the adaptive value of characteristics and behaviours. So if we have good behaviours, then we're more likely to survive in society. We also have G. Stanley Hall, who was an American psychologist who was inspired by Darwin. So you might have heard of the term social Darwinism. This is the kinds of theories that people are referring to when they talk about social Darwinism. So Stanley Hall regarded development as an automatic, genetically determined process. So Hall, alongside his student Arnold Gassell, designed the normative approach to the study of children. In this approach, large numbers of individuals are measured on a range of behaviours, and age-related averages are calculated to represent typical development. So this is a very kind of scientific and standardised ways of measuring behaviours. Of course, these work to a certain extent, but they don't take the subtleties into account. And also you have to take into account that when you do these kinds of studies, you're measuring the kinds of behaviours that the researchers consider to be important. Then we had the mental testing movement from Alfred Binet, who also had this normative approach to the study of children. And the normative approach means that things should happen in a certain way and at a certain period of development. So it is very kind of structured and a one-size-fits-all kind of theoretical framework. His idea, or the reason behind doing this, was to be able to identify learning difficulties. So, for example, if a child couldn't speak by a certain time, then this was identified as a learning difficulty, and then we could put things in place to address the learning difficulty. So this idea is still in use today, and it's also the basis for ideas like eugenics and other controversial ideas about human development. One bad apple will spoil the whole bunch, etc., etc. Okay, so also out of this kind of milieu came the idea of intelligence tests. So perhaps you've taken an intelligence test. I know that I did when I was probably about 12 or 13. But intelligence in and of itself is a very constructed idea, isn't it? So what do you think intelligence is? Do you think some people are smarter than others, or that we just have different abilities? Very interesting concept. The other thing in critique of intelligence tests is that they're very middle class, and they take it for granted that people will have the same kind of education and educational opportunities. Adaptive functioning. So often IQ tests today are supplemented by tests of adaptive functioning, which show what a person can do in a day. So are they able to do normal kind of, or what we would consider to be normal day-to-day tasks? Like, for example, take something back to the shop. If you buy a shoe and it doesn't work properly, can you just take it back to the shop, or does it just become this huge thing which is beyond your capability to do? Are you capable of taking care of yourself on a day-to-day kind of basis? Do you buy everything you need when you go to the supermarket, or do you, even if you take a list, forget things and have to go back? Are you very maladaptive in terms of the fact that you lose things all the time? You can't find your car keys, those kinds of things. I can really relate to that. But I have put them in one place now, so I've cured myself. Okay, so moving along up to the turn of the 20th century, we have Freud and his theories emphasised in his theories of psychosexual development. So Freud very much believed that development depended on how parents treated their children and their sexual and aggressive drives in early life. And he came up with the idea of the id, the ego, and the superego. And you can see from the little cartoon down the bottom, the id is the instincts, the ego is reality, and the superego is morality. So, for example, the id might see ice cream, a tub of ice cream, and go, yeah, I'm going to eat all of that, delicious, yum, yum, yum. But the ego would go, hey, wait, if I eat that whole tub of ice cream, I'll feel really sick, and ultimately if I eat like that, I'll get fat. So then the superego goes, okay, well, I'll just have a small bowl of ice cream. So that was basically the way that Freud's theory worked. So the id is our kind of primal urge. I want all the ice cream and I want it right now. The ego is the conscious, rational part of our personality, and it starts to emerge and develop from a young age. So the ego is there to help us redirect its impulses. So a little child might scream for their bowl of ice cream, whereas an older child might go, okay, well, yeah, I do have to eat my food you know, my dinner food before I have my ice cream. And the superego represents the ability to distinguish between right and wrong. So it starts to emerge between 3 and 6 years of age, and this is through the interaction with parents, teachers, and others who make children conform to society's values. So at this stage, the child might go, okay, Mum, if I eat my dinner, can I have a bowl of ice cream? Hope that makes that little ice cream analogy help to make a little more sense to you. Okay, Freud also developed a theory of the unconscious. Now, we take the idea that we have an unconscious and that our unconscious is a very big part of how we live our lives completely for granted, but actually, someone actually had to come up with the idea that we have this unconscious mind. And Freud's main ideas was that the unconscious really, there's ideas and things in our unconscious that really structure the way that we move. And if we can come to some understanding of what's going on in our unconscious, we'll have come to a better idea of our behaviours. And Freud called the dreams the royal road to the unconscious. So that's something to think about next time you have a dream. Think about what it might be saying to you unconsciously. Don't be too literal. Like sometimes, for example, baby dreams can be dreams about something that we happened to us in our own youth, or that could be just telling us that we need that we need to have more nurturing in our lives, for example. So Freud believed that like an ice block, the most important part of our mind is the mind that we can't see, that we can't connect to. And that Freud's, like a lot of different theorists believe in the power of the unconscious. But in Freudian theory, what Freudian therapists are sort of trying to do with you is to get you to access and understand your past experiences stored in the unconscious. And so you've probably all heard of, you know, Freudian slips, where you say something but you really mean something else. And there's an example on this slide also. So Freud believed there were 5 stages of development from infancy to adolescence. And remember, we're going through here, we're looking at the development and the history of understandings of development. So Freud came up with these 5 stages. It was very controversial in the time. People hadn't thought about it this way before. And we know that there have been a lot of critiques of this post Freud and a lot of building on his theories. So the excuse me for a second. Sorry. So we have the oral stage first, then the anal stage, and the phallic and genital stages. So how balanced they feel in terms of how much each stage is gratified will impact on whether they are well adjusted as adults. So we also have from Freud the Oedipus complex, which is a child's feeling of desire for their parent to be their only parent, and jealousy and anger towards the same sex parent. Another critique of Freud is that there was no recognition of the importance of adolescence. So then we have Erikson's psychosocial theory. So he built on Freud's theories about the unconscious and the repressed mind and the different stages, but added more of a social element to it, or sociological, I guess. So Freud's theory was criticised because it emphasised sexual feelings and development, and for being culturally insensitive and sexist, which of course was. He was one of those kind of German or Swiss theorists that emerged at that point in time. And yeah, those critiques are founded in reality. We have Erik Erikson, who was around from 1902 to 1994, so a movement on later on in time, and he developed his own version of child and adult development, but he added the 3 adult stages. And at each stage, there's a psychological conflict which occurs, which can be resolved either positively or negatively. And his idea is that we move from one stage to the next. So I've asked you to, well, I've used the example of Erikson's stages and conflicts in the discussion forum this week. I think it's interesting maybe to stop the video here and go through these different ages and psychosocial tasks or crises that might happen at this time, and then look at the virtue that's developed from that and see if you can see that in your children's or your own kind of development. So this is a really good time to stop and think about things. And I know that we've been doing it in the discussion forum, mostly looking at the stages that we're in at the moment. But yeah, just stop and have a look. If you can remember your own childhood, then do it about that. But if you've got children or other children that you're involved in, just try and think about an example of this at each stage. It will help you remember it for a long time. Okay, so here is a video of attachment theory. It goes on for about 10 minutes. I suggest that you watch it. It's you'll get bored just looking at me for the whole time, so have a look there. And now we're moving on to behaviourism. So behaviourism developed, it became popular in the 1950s in Western society, but it grew out of the ideas of John Watson, who was around from 1878 to 1958, and he wanted to develop psychology into this objective science. So you've probably heard of Pavlov's dog. When the dog hears the bell, it starts to salivate. So he believed right back there with the early theorists, Rousseau, etc., that children were indeed blank slates and that adults can shape their behaviour by carefully controlling stimulus-response association. So the idea that if your child goes to the supermarket and screams for a chocolate bar and you don't give it to that child, that over time the child will stop screaming for the chocolate bar, for example. And we've got B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning theory. So he believed that learning is established through reinforcement or reward and through punishment. So these kinds of theories have been very much critiqued from a number of different perspectives, but they still have a lot of currency in today's world, and of course they underpin cognitive behavioural therapy. We then have social learning theory, which I think makes a lot of sense. We learn through imitation and modelling. So we might pay attention to a behaviour that we kind of like or admire and try to imitate it. So I'm sure that you can think of examples in your own life where you've seen something and thought, oh, that's really cool. I think I'll do that. I know that, for example, I was working with an advertising agency. They were doing some work for me once, and the person there wrote best wishes, and I thought, yes, actually, best wishes is actually quite nice. It's nicer than, it's more realistic when you don't know someone very well than warm wishes. It's formal. Yeah, so I've started to use that. So then we have Piaget's theory of cognitive development. So he was a Swiss cognitive therapist. Remember, there's lots of Swiss and Germans in these theorists. And he proposed that children work through universal stages in their brain's development, and their experiences expand. So cognitive development begins with the baby's sensory and motor explorations of the world, so they kind of touch and taste things. The preschool child develops symbolic or illogical thinking in a pre-operational stage. So, for example, there'll be lots of fantasy play at that age. In the concrete operational stage, the school age, the children begins to organise their thought into an integrated system of logic and reason, which means they can now go, if this happens, then that will happen. And finally, we get to the complex stage where things become more abstract. Okay, so Piaget thinks that, or said that a child thinks differently from an adult, and there's a YouTube video here which I also suggest you watch. Now, next we're going to move on to Vygotsky, who emphasises the role that interaction plays in cognitive development. So for Vygotsky, it's very much about how we interact with each other. So we learn by interacting with each other. And he believed that children really actively go and do that, probably more than adults do. And suggested that it's not, like, the way that we learn is not independent. We actually learn in conjunction with other. So he also proposed that this happens in stages. So, for example, when children acquire language, their development with regard to social interaction takes a rapid gain. But I would like you to try this exercise. So you need at least 2 other people. This really illustrates Vygotsky's kind of social learning theory. So I want you to explain a concept that you've learned this week to someone you know, and make sure that it's a few sentences. You know, it's not too simple. It would be, you know, maybe 5 minutes of talking, maybe a little less. But then after you've explained it, get one person to tell you in less than 1 minute what you just said to them, and then have a discussion between the three people about your understanding. And the chances are that you'll all have taken something slightly different from the explanation, and this illustrates social learning. For Vygotsky, families are very important because they kind of give you the social context and the tools that you need to do well at school. So families will teach their children how to learn. So I don't know, do you think this is right? I mean, in this subject, it's not your first subject. It's time for you to start thinking about what resonates for you and what doesn't resonate for you. It's time for you to start being critical. Then we have ecological systems theory, which I've also put, which you also have a reading for, which someone had some trouble accessing, so we will put that in this week's content. But this is about how we are part of this kind of system, this ecological system. So there are these different elements to the system, from the very, very kind of micro, what's happening right around us. It's freezing cold outside today, but I'm sitting in a nice warm room, to the macro system. Well, I live in a country which is, not the macro system, but to the kind of macro environment, is that I live in a country where war is not going on, where people have a certain degree of social well-being. So first of all, we've got the microsystem, which is that everyday environment. So this is also our interactions between us and the people around you. So his idea, Bronfenbrenner's idea, is that that children have an active role in shaping the world that they live in. So lots of kind of agency to the child. Next, we have the mesosystem that connects the various aspects of the micro systems. So the mesosystem includes not just me sitting in my warm room, but also my partner. If my partner comes home and they haven't had a good day, then they might be kind of a bit short with me, and they might be short-tempered with children that are around as not as well, or if a children isn't performing so well in school or is having some kind of other difficulty, then this will also affect the mesosystem. So the exosystem is the broader influences of societal institutions like government, community, health and welfare. So this is how much, this is kind of your social development, the social world around you, social determinants, which you would have learned about in health and wellbeing and in your social policy classes. And then we've got the chronosystem, which is a temporal dimension, which underlies the environmental systems, which we've already talked about. So it involves also the internal and external passages of time. So other things that are happening in life, choices, transitions, getting older, historical events. If there was an earthquake, that would be part of the chronosystem, and it's a dynamic and ever-changing system. I quite like this kind of understanding of how we develop, because it's more kind of nuanced. It's got more kind of things feeding into it and going on. So this is an activity for you. So applying the bioecological model to your own life. And then reflect on some of these questions. How have biological and environmental factors interacted to affect your personal development? How have you been influenced by the environment? How have you influenced your environment? What have been some of the major turning points in your life? So, for example, the birth of a sibling, changing a high school, entering university, getting married. How did these events affect you from a systematic point of view? And how have each of Bronfenbrenner's systems affected your development in the past year? So thank you for watching this, and I look forward to actually talking to you face to face next week.